Member for Perth.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Recycling is how we build our future. Low emissions, low environmental impact, and quality jobs. There is no reason that we can't have a big, thriving, growing recycling industry here in Australia that deals with our own waste. That's what this legislation is about, and indeed the amendment is about. It's about taking responsibility for our own waste here in Australia, a principle that everyone in this place should agree with. We can't just ship our problems to other jurisdictions and, at the same time, be shipping the potential for scientific breakthroughs, innovation and indeed jobs away with it as well. I commend the member for Fremantle for his amendment. He is a strong voice for the West Australian environment and a strong environmentalist who acts in the national interest in this parliament. In mine and the member for Fremantle's home state of Western Australia, we finally, and the South Australians would say that we took maybe a little too long, but we finally have a container deposit recycling scheme. That recycling scheme has already seen, in just 1 month of operation, some 10 million cans and bottles recycled, paying out some $1 million dues to Western Australians and indeed to many sporting clubs. And I commend those sporting clubs who have found this as a really new and innovative way to fundraise, particularly when we know that this government has cut a range of sporting programs that they normally rely on because they can't administer them in the national interest. They were only able to administer them in their personal political interest, which was incredibly disappointing. When you think about the scale of the waste that we're dealing with, 67 million tonnes of waste a year. I can't comprehend how big a volume of waste that is. But when almost half of it, some 30 million tonnes, is not recycled at all, we of course can improve a great deal. And when it comes to plastic, every one of us in Australia on average generates 102 kilograms of plastic. That's 102 kilograms. And only 12% of that plastic is recycled, despite the fact that more than 50% of it is recyclable. We are not meeting our objectives and we are not meeting our obligations to future generations if we don't get serious about recycling. Obviously, this bill is to introduce a ban on the export of certain waste materials, also providing some updates, much-needed updates, to the existing stewardship laws and amending the National Television and Computer Recycling Scheme. And it gives me fond memories of the first computer that was in my household, the Apple Mac Classic, which I'm sure has now been, I hope it has been recycled, or it might be in a museum somewhere. I never had the joy of a Commodore 64, and indeed I think anyone who has a Commodore 64 would definitely not be recycling it. They would be getting a very high price on eBay for such a piece of ancient but important technological history. And I'm sure that my Mac Classic and the Apple-powered PC 570 that followed it and the HP Pavilion that followed that are all hopefully somewhere happy in recycling computer heaven. But it is important that we do recycle all of these things because there's obviously a large range of rare earths and precious minerals that go into the manufacture of those computers, and the more that we can recycle those, the more we can lower the costs of computing power, which is obviously essential for our future. Banning the exports on glass, mixed plastics, whole-use tyres, single resin or polymer plastics, mixed and unsorted paper and cardboard, all makes really practical sense. And for that reason that the Labor Party will support the bills, but of course seeking to amend the legislation to improve and broaden the impact of the scheme. I think Labor has a very proud history of taking the lead when it comes to recycling policy. In 2009, we created the National Waste Policy, trying to start to build a product stewardship program and actually having a national waste process. Because this is something where if we do it nationally and we get it right, there are huge economic benefits for our country. We do not need to be shipping this waste overseas. But this legislation isn't perfect. The government's own review has found that growing numbers of their industry free riders are refusing to take responsibility for products that they manufacture. This is the main reason that voluntary schemes fail. And when we're only recycling about half of our waste and the other half is going into landfill, we are just creating problems for future generations. I'm going to talk about some of the activities in my electorate of Perth where we are trying to, at a local level, take action on this. I start with the city of Bayswater. Now, the city of Bayswater has Riverside Gardens. Riverside Gardens was the dump for the most of the Perth electorate in the inner suburbs of the north of the metropolitan area for many, many decades. Riverside Gardens, thankfully, has been to some level remediated and is now some beautiful water frontage, parklands, and a large patch of grass. The city of Bayswater's vision is actually to turn this old tip, which now sits very close to a large number of houses, into a new urban forest as part of their efforts to reforest large parts of the city of Bayswater. And I think that's appropriate. I think that's something that we should also look in this place about how we support the remediation of tips that have been, really only partly restored to what they were before we started dumping our rubbish in those locations. I did the count in the electorate of Perth. There are 23 Buy Nothing, Sell Nothing Facebook groups. And now that's not in metropolitan Perth, that's just in the electorate of Perth. That is a sign that people are serious about doing what they can to avoid things ever going to a recycling plant, ever even going into landfill. I've got the city of Vincent and the town of Bassendean who are going to FOGO. For those who don't know, FOGO, Food Organics, Garden Organics bins. These have been incredibly popular where they have been rolled out in other council jurisdictions, and it's just another way that people could actually start the recycling journey at home by avoiding things going into landfill at all. And I want to give a shout out to the workers at the City of Stirling's Resource Recovery Centre. The City of Stirling's Resource Recovery Centre will take almost anything that doesn't smell and recycle it. You can drop off your polystyrene there, you can drop off your cardboard, you can drop off your television, your fridge, and there's a bunch of really dedicated council workers who keep that facility running. I commend the City of Stirling for making that a free facility for the people of Stirling, and indeed as a resident of the City of Vincent, I am still allowed to cross the council border, one of the borders we can cross, and take my recyclables there as well. It's a great community resource. It's a great hub of activity for bin chickens in the metropolitan area, and it ensures that people can access recycling in a convenient way to them. Finally, I do want to say on the councils, before I talk to other matters on the bill, that it is time that the City of Perth, the CBD of Perth, had a proper recycling plan. We have huge numbers of businesses who should be doing more and could be recycling more. And I hope that with the new Mayor of Perth, and I congratulate Basil Zemplis on his election, it is a very exciting time for our city. I hope that they can start some serious action on recycling so that our CBD has a proper recycling plan that takes us well into the future. There have been people of all ages in my electorate who campaign about the need to do more on waste. I've spoken in this place before about the work that the kindergarten students do at Perth College. They have run their own recycling campaigns. They wanted to see less plastic being used by local cafes. And so rather than wait on all of us to get around to this, they decided they were going to start lobbying, and these are kindergarten kids, start lobbying local cafes with their poster to say, let's do something to prevent plastic going into our environment. And possibly some of the more successful lobbying efforts I've seen in recent times. They've been incredibly successful with local cafes, and once again, I commend them. They wanted to do something about plastics because they'd learnt what we do know in this place, which is that plastics can affect our wildlife when left out in the open and not properly managed. Conservative estimates are that plastic affects some 267 species globally, including 86% of sea turtles have some impact from plastics in the ocean. 43% of marine mammals are at risk of being harmed by plastics in our oceans. And 130,000 tonnes of Australian plastic that we all use, ends up in our waterways and oceans each year. And as an electorate that is on the Swan River, I know that whenever we see plastic in the Swan River, there's only two places that it ends up. It ends up on our shores or it ends up in the ocean, and when it ends up in the ocean, it ends up harming sea life. So the more we can do, the better when it comes to protecting our amazing coast and the animals that live there. I mentioned earlier the WA Containers for Change program, that finally Western Australia does have a container deposit recycling scheme. A huge shout out to Stephen Dawson, the State Minister, who has led this change. It is well overdue, and it has been an incredibly smooth start to this program. And these programs don't always start smoothly, and that's often because there hasn't been a lot of hard work behind the scenes. On this occasion, there was lots of hard work behind the scenes, and I commend some of those who were intimately involved in it, particularly someone who is well known in this place, my friend Hannah Beasley, who has worked very hard on that program. Hannah, you and your team have done an amazing job in communicating with communities about how they can have an impact. And equally, Rhys Whedon, who is a brewer in West Leederville, the lesser of the Leedervilles, given that it's just outside my electorate and I've only got Leederville itself. But Rhys is a brewer who has also made sure that the industry is represented, and I congratulate Rhys for his work on the board in terms of making that WA Containers for Change program such a successful start. There's things that we can learn from this in terms of how we go forward. There is still 1.3 billion beverage containers consumed in Western Australia every year. Not all of them are recycled. We'll see in the next year whether or not this program does indeed generate an increase in recycling. What we do know that it will generate, and the modelling has already been done on this, is that it will generate 600 jobs, 600 new local jobs in an environmentally sustainable way. That has to be a good thing. It's expected, and I hope this is an underestimate, but some 6.6 billion containers over the next 20 years will be recycled, an additional 6.6 billion containers over the next 20 years, and 40% of those jobs that I mentioned are projected to go to long-term unemployed, Indigenous and people with a disability. Again, something I think everyone in this place can get behind. There's finally, when it comes to management of waste and creative recycling, I just want to talk about Remedia, a WA reuse centre based in West Perth. It started as an initiative of Bold Park Primary School. Bold Park School, I should say. They also have a senior campus. In 2004, the teachers and parents of Bold Park Community School collected 1,000 containers of waste materials. They became the feature of an artistic installation which was set up in Forest Place in the heart of Perth. The artwork inspired the community to rethink waste and possible ways that they could do more. Remedia is now a community-run, not-for-profit, collecting industry waste, cut-offs, old stock that can be used in children's workshops. I think you need to look at a daycare centre or a pre-primary or early years education for people to know that the making table is one of the hottest bits of property in an early learning centre, and making sure that there are things to make with is equally important. And organisations like Remedia make sure that kids can make truly creative things and they can then go into parents' home with a new life rather than going into waste. I've already mentioned the 23 Buy Nothing, Sell Nothing groups on Facebook for Perth. We also have 3 toy libraries, again, making sure that children can access a range of toys without generating excess plastic waste. Local governments that are doing more when it comes to reduce, reuse and recycle. I will conclude my comments by just saying, while this is a step in the right direction, there is so much more opportunity in what this government could be doing when it comes to greater coordination across the Federation in recycling and reusables. There is something that we don't always acknowledge, the power that we have when we pull ourselves together and do more together. This piece of legislation is a step in the right direction, and I'll conclude my remarks there. Deputy Speaker, thank you very much.